Pain. There was nothing but pain. Fire behind his eyes, leaping forth and coursing down the right side of his face. His eyes could not focus, seeing nothing but light and shadow. Shape saluted him. A taste of bitter metal and earth swelled in his mouth. Heat and a light breeze that played across the exposed skin on his hands, bringing a cooling evaporation of sweat or intense discomfort to the insides of new injuries. "Help me." The words were barely a whisper in James' mouth. The pain seemed to crawl into his lungs, robbing him of the ability to breathe. The burning sensation that had swelled in his head spread to his voice. Attempting to swallow and clear the disturbance brought a raw, gritty sensation. "What's going on?" his stunned mind queried. "What is happening to me?" A voice, clear and unambiguous, formed in his eardrums. Unlike the rush of blood and rapid heartbeats that were the only sounds he could comprehend, his mind could hear these words. They cut through the fog obscuring his thoughts, bringing consciousness to that one aspect of his fractured psyche. "Are you just going to lie there?" The question was strange, nonsensical. He couldn't move. The slightest motion brought nothing but pain to every aspect of his senses. Willing his voice to come forth, James tried desperately to say something in response. It came out as a sob of distress, followed by a whimper. "Ugh. Pathetic." The voice took on an aspect of reproach, tinged with a faint patina of amusement. "The least that you could do is acknowledge my presence." James could not reply. The dust he inhaled into his nose forbade any action except a desperate racking cough. That too brought his pain to the fore. He lay there, pressed against the earth as he sprawled. How had he come to this such pain? He couldn't remember anything but pain. He rotated his eyes in the direction he thought the voice had come from. The shapes still swam in his sight, seeming like the shapes of a dog, a man, a bird. They were all one and nothing, clouds and starlight points of ether. No sense and no meaning ascribed to any of them. Willing the straining muscles of his arm, he reached, trying to touch. The dirt shifted under his fingers as his hand inched forward. He contacted something, but in his condition, he could not tell if it was stone, man, or nothing at all save the raw earth. "I guess that will have to do." The voice seemed deep, as that one conscious portion of James' mind tried to make a pattern of it. No recognition came, but it seemed familiar, like many voices he had heard in his life, and yet like none of them. With the sounds of his own body rushing in his ears, it seemed as if the cry of a bird became intertwined with the mournful howls heard late at night, all reflected in the intonations of the words that came to his senses. "You look to be alone and to seek yourself, and what do?" The voice became light-hearted, with a smile more heard than seen. "You find yourself and the spirit that could guide you." "Happy?" James cried out again, his lips grinding the soil upon them further into his injuries. A twisted shard of metal from the braces he wore curled into his gum as he did so. Tears welled and spilled across his face, unnoticed by the skin that was already soaked with his sweat. The words this voice spoke made no sense. He hurt. Was this voice going to help him? What quest, what seeking? The final question welled up from somewhere dark inside. Was he dying? The agony too much for him, James let loose a cry from somewhere deep in his soul. Trying to find comfort in something. In the inner recesses of his mind, a child's cry lurched forward to the center of his throat and poured forth in a desperate aching wail. "Mom." The voice said nothing for a long time. James lay where he was, feeling his blood on his lips, the deep gashes in his face and hands. The aches and pains in every corner of his body took every bit of his thought. The patterns before his eyes swirled and grew darker. "You are not a man. You are a child. A child should not seek out that which he is not ready to confront." The voice was stern. In a few pain-racked breaths, James heard the final words of the voice in his mind, clear and precise. "One day, you will be ready to return to this place. When you do, know that I will await you." The words left no impression on his mind. He knew them, but they became locked away in the blackness that engulfed him. At the age of 16, James Fletcher rode a dirt bike into the hills of Hollister, California. At some point during that ride, he lost control of his vehicle. Several hikers later found the bloodied teen lying face down in the soil and immediately summoned an ambulance. He had no recollection of what had occurred and was later diagnosed as suffering from a serious concussion, which led to temporary memory loss. For 2 days, James lay in a hospital bed. His face had been severely slashed by debris, and he required a thorough cleansing of his wounds followed by numerous stitches. His teeth were saved by the braces that he was wearing at the time, although they had inflicted similar wounds on the inside of his mouth. During his stay in the hospital, he occasionally mumbled various phrases, which was perfectly normal for someone with a severe concussion. His family would speak to him, but he would seem surprised every time they arrived. After that time, he recovered his memory somewhat, although the doctors were forced to explain that he had lost 2 days of his life that he would never get back. Altogether, he had been extremely lucky, and despite some superficial bruises on the rest of his body, he was relatively unharmed. 2 months later, James went off to college. The University of Idaho had accepted the young wunderkind on the basis of his grades alone. Having graduated high school at 15 due to high intelligence and poor socialization, he was thrust into the world of a 4-year college at the tender age of 16. Despite being a legacy, he was of course denied any chance to become a fraternity member and as a result migrated to the dorms. The next year was extremely unsuccessful for him both academically and socially, since he was not welcome at any social activities due to his youth. This isolation impacted his ability to study. James spent most of the year hiding in his dorm room and avoiding the company of others, as well as his professors. During one of his rare attempts at making friends, he lost his virginity, being taken advantage of by another male student at a party while in an inebriated state. After that, James drank considerably more, in his dorm room, with the door locked. He flunked out at the end of the 2nd semester. Returning home, James joined the Navy in a vain attempt to gain some meaning in his life. Consigned to a role as an intrinsic failure, his naval career was just as brief as his college experience, lasting only a year. During that time, he spent most of his leisure avoiding reality, retreating into the computers that he worked on. He chalked it up as another example of his failures. Now 18, the young man returned to college at a local community. He occasionally studied, more to keep the parents he lived with off his back than out of any desire to actually succeed. It was during this period that James tried to lose himself in music, playing the guitar. His professors all agreed that he had real talent, if he would just apply himself. James did, more out of the love of music than the desire to succeed, and learned the great composers, their works, and his own talents and limitations. Somewhat more mature at this point, he applied to a conservatory in Los Angeles, which accepted him upon audition. Music became everything to James. He played his guitar constantly, working diligently to improve his craft. His skills improved along with his people's skills. Despite his successes, he discovered, over the course of 2 years in the city, that there was nothing that he had that 100 others wouldn't do for less money. He wasn't the right gender to sleep his way to the top, and his family was not the type to hand him a record contract on a silver platter. The initial eagerness now abated, James began working at minimum wage jobs in an attempt to make ends meet. He truly believed that his chance was just over the next rise. Despite these things, James fell in love with a woman over the internet, which had become a bit of a haven for him. Their relationship was passionate but brief. She became homesick after moving to Los Angeles from her home in Texas. Agreeing to return with her at her promise of marriage, James drove her to her home. Her parents loathed the outsider from LA from the beginning and banned him from their home only a few weeks after their arrival. With no money and no hopes left, James accepted defeat and returned home to his parents. At the age of 23, James left home one last time. He accepted a small clerical position at a local newspaper and found a small, modest apartment in a bedroom community near his home. It was there, after a long night of playing the guitar loudly and drinking heavily, that he wrote his farewell note and prepared to write off the rest of his life as just one more mistake. James swirled the last few drops of the sake around in the small plastic cup. The liquid ran around the lower rim of the cheap cup, collecting briefly on the small raised surfaces inherent in the plastic before coalescing into a small pool. He inhaled deeply, then tasted the liquid again. His thoughts turned back to communion, remembering the first taste of wine. This was similar, but with an aftertaste of slightly burned rice. He thought about how he would probably like sake more if they added a butter flavor to it. Overall, as a new experience, he considered the sake just another waste of time. He sat on the mattress that lined one side of the room he resided in. It wasn't a home. He knew that this was the place he was going to die in when he rented it. A television, a toilet, a microwave, and a bed were the only furnishings in the place. It was a place that maintained the basics, but nothing else. He had no yard, and his ancient Plymouth needed to be parked on the street, necessitating that he not spend any time in the house before 6, lest the parking authorities come and take it away. Weekends were the only exception. He tossed the plastic cup into a corner and pulled his guitar into his lap. It was a nice instrument, not expensive, but not cheap either. His back rested against the wall as he closed his eyes and began picking out a slow piece. There were no chords in the song, just notes rising and falling with his breath. As he played, his eyes opened and lighted on the note he had finished writing. It had been spat out perfectly from the bowels of his computer's printer. He had considered creating a more immersive experience for the note by burning it onto a CD along with some samples of his better work, but immediately reconsidered when he remembered how computer illiterate most of his soon-to-be audience was. Better that the authorities have no ambiguities about his motives. Near the note lay a bottle of pills. James didn't know what was in them, and he frankly didn't care. He just knew that they would do the job if he took enough of them with alcohol. An acquaintance from school who had sold them to him had warned him that although they would help him calm down, they could be extremely dangerous. Noting the now empty bottle of rice wine at his feet, he ironically reflected that step 1 of his plan was done. Breathing deeply, James finished the last note on the guitar, then placed it reverently on a nearby stand. His vision moved to the mirror that graced the wall nearby. His gaze swept across his face, tired and defeated. He was an average man, with a high forehead that gave the false impression that he was prematurely losing the dark blonde hairs on his head. Normally his hair was parted on the left, the bangs occasionally crossing over his right eye, but to say that he was now unkempt was an understatement. The small clumps of his bangs hung down over his gray eyes that had never developed laugh lines, partially shielding the view that he had long considered not only unattractive but downright homely. The overall shape of his hair framed the rounded face beneath. He took in his own visage, with the high cheekbones that his sister had always joked about wanting to borrow. There was 3 days' stubble along the line of his curved jaw, but even that did not amount to much, considering how little he had ever had to shave. "You look terrible," he mumbled to the reflection in the mirror. The athletically built man in the glass did not reply, eliciting a non-committal grunt from James. Jeans and a shirt had been his standard dress for years, and he thought it was only fitting that that particular garment be the one he was found in. He stumbled to his feet and moved to the bottle that squatted menacingly on the table. He closed his eyes one last time, trying to get up the courage to finish what he started. "Don't mess this one up," he murmured as he reached forward. The bottle was light in his hand, as all such bottles were. The cap wasn't childproof and came off easily in his grasp. He looked in at the small white shapes within, trying in vain to quell the fear of the unknown that was rising in him. He nodded softly with deep regrets and began to tilt the bottle. The lethal substances began to roll within the bottle, closing towards its lip, when a familiar sound floated across his mind. The sound was not the sound of the ocean, even though the ocean was near to his abode. The words that reached his ears sounded far off, like a sound that was not so much real as imagined. "Giving up on your life so easily?" The words were hauntingly familiar. Something grasped at his soul, and he felt compelled to listen. His hands dropped limply as the bottle fell from them and scattered its contents across the deep orange and brown rug. Eyes wide, he turned, looking in the direction of the sound. Near the large sliding door that was the only entrance to the room, there was a figure. It was indistinct, the shape seeming more of a dream than a true vision. They melded into one another, reflecting images that could not be reflected. James felt a strange attraction and a familiarity that he did not understand. You have found me once. This time I find you. I am the spirit that would guide your life. James had no words to respond. The vision in front of him had not moved, but the words were clear in his mind. What are you? The question came out hesitantly. Uncertainty clouded his mind again. Was he hallucinating? He had seen this sight before, but he could not recall where or when. I am the vision you saw in your pain. The words were true. He was unable to comprehend how he knew that, but the words forming in his mind were nothing but truth. You sought guidance from yourself, but were only a child who knew nothing of your life. Visions flitted through the mind of James. Visions of his youth, his childhood. And then a day that was forever blocked from his mind came to the fore. I remember you. The vision, the pain, the blood. It had been buried in a dark, black place in his mind for so long, and yet it was there again, burning in his mind like it had happened 5 minutes previously. He remembered that brief moment of flying and the pain afterward. You were not ready. A child cannot learn from himself when he knows nothing. James sighed, his vision taking in the creature that seemed nothing more than the vestiges of a drunken nightmare. Perhaps that is what this truly was, and not a memory at all, but a drunken figment. You're not real. James denied the creature. He turned, and dropping to his knees, began to collect the widely scattered pills. He had gathered a few when he felt a light touch on his shoulder.